Good afternoon and welcome to week 5 of our summer food club. Today I'm going to be cooking spaghetti bolognese with you and melting chocolate pud. So we'll start with the spaghetti bolognese and I have an onion, and so we're going to start with cutting the onion. So lots of people cut onions in different ways. The way that I do it is just to cut the top end off, and then I put the top end because it's easier to cut then, and then cut it in half. That just then makes it easier to peel off the outer layer, which I don't want. And then to do the same with the second half. And then I use Julie's technique, which is to slice to the root and then cut the other way. So I'll just show you. The reason for that is, apparently, I've been told, that this end here, this is where you get the chemical which causes your eyes to water. And so, because I used to cry all the time when I was doing onions, then I found that this was a way of, I'm less likely to cry. So if you go almost to the root, but not quite, cut down, and then you can make it as chunky or as thin as you like. Doesn't matter with the spaghetti bolognese because it's going to cook down fairly well. And then we'll do the same. Almost to the root and then bring it back, almost to the root and bring it back. Now by this time I would have been crying my eyes out if I was doing it the other way. However, this way is just that a little bit easier. Now just for the processes of a camera, I'm going to get the garlic ready, but I don't actually need to put the garlic in yet. So I just do exactly the same, cut off the top end. And then peel it away. So with the garlic, I have tried doing it Julie's way and Neil's way, which is to, I'm going to cut the other end off as well, which is to squash it with a flat knife. But the last time I did that, it scooted across the kitchen. So I'm not brave enough to do it in front of the camera today. This is being particularly stubborn. So we probably have every gadget in the kitchen, people, because I've always enjoyed cooking. Not that I'm particularly good, but I've always enjoyed cooking. Then over the years, then either mum or various family friends have bought various gadgets. So I'm lucky enough to have a garlic press, which saves me an awful lot of time when I'm doing the when I'm using garlic. You can cheat by using chopped garlic, so we use quite a lot of garlic in the house, so I sometimes, if I know I'm going to do a particular lot of cooking, then I'll buy a pot of chopped garlic. It's not as fresh and doesn't taste quite so nice as the fresh garlic that's come straight from a bulb. Okay, so we're going to move over to okay, so to cook the mince, then you just put either a tablespoon, a small amount of vegetable oil in. I use Fry Light, particularly with mince, because the mince is going to, some of the fat is going to come out of the mince, then I don't actually need an awful lot of vegetable oil. So instead of having 2 teaspoons of vegetable oil, then I just use the either sunflower oil, you get it in vegetable oil, you can also get it in olive oil. And then I just squirt the pan, which I've already done, and then wait for it to warm up a bit. And then we are going to leave the garlic to one side, put the onion in. And we're just going to fry the garlic, fry the onion for about 3 or 4 minutes. So you can use a variety of onion. You can use, I've used white onion today. I probably use red onion most because it seems to be slightly sweeter and doesn't make me cry quite as much as the white onion. But either you can use either. So while that's just cooking for a couple of minutes, it's the mince. So the mince that I use 5% fat mince. It's slightly more expensive, but particularly with the Bolognaise, when you fry the mince, then if it's a higher fat content, then you tend to end up with a lot of fat left floating around in your mince sauce, and it's quite difficult to get that when you are leaving it to simmer for a few minutes. Then it's more difficult. It remains quite liquidy. Okay, so that's cooking. The onion's cooking nicely. So today I'm using 750 grams. The recipe actually says 500 grams, but I tend to use more minced beef because we often use it for leftovers. So my husband or I will have leftovers the next day, or if you do double the amount that you need, then you can use it for a spaghetti bolognese, not spaghetti, a cottage pie recipe. So in goes the mince. So with the cottage pie recipe, you do exactly the same as I'm doing now. So fry the onions and the mince. When you, just after you've done the mince, you can add some more vegetables, and then you just top it with the mashed potato. So what I'm doing with the mince now is making sure that I'm chopping it up into smaller pieces. If you don't do that, then you end up with some hard lumps of minced beef. So I'm just going to turn it. It doesn't have to be cooked thoroughly at this point. It doesn't matter if there's some slight pink bits, because you're going to be simmering it for up to about half an hour afterwards, and so that will make sure that it is absolutely thoroughly cooked. The important bit at this stage is we're going to fry it for another 3 or 4 minutes. The important bit at this stage is to make sure that you've got all of those lumps gone, so that there aren't any lumps, hard lumps. That's mixing nicely. Just going to turn it because it cooks at the bottom and then it's raw at the top. Okay, so just for the process of the camera, you can see it's starting to brown already, and then the onions are just. So I'll leave that to fry for a few minutes more. So this is a garlic press. This saves me time in the kitchen. So the bulb just goes into here, and then we're just going to squeeze it. And as you squeeze it, then it comes out. So it's got all the nice juices, but it leaves the tougher skin on the outside. So I just use a knife to scrape that off. And then you've got the hard bit that you don't want, which I'm just going to scoop out. And I'm going to use the second bulb. Do exactly the same, squeeze it out. If I didn't have a garlic press, I would just cut it up as normally. Or I would practice Julie and Neil's technique, which is to use the flat blade of the knife to be able to squeeze it. Okay, so I'm going to mix that in now. Again, it's just making sure that you haven't got any large lumps of meat. Now there's other recipes that you can do with the bolognese. So at this point you can add the extra vegetables, which I said for the cottage pie. Alternatively, if you decided you were going to do a Mexican recipe, then you could use a fajita mix, and instead of the mixed herbs, which I'm going to put in now, then you put in the fajita mix. You can get it at all supermarkets. So I'm going to put a teaspoon of mixed herbs in. And then if you were doing the fajita mix, put the fajita mix in just like I've done with herbs, and then you would put some kidney beans in instead. Alternatively, if you prefer a chili, which is very nice, you do exactly the same, but perhaps put the kidney beans, chili instead of the fajita mix or the herbs, and then you can put in some peppers as well. So The chili you can serve with rice. This I'm going to serve with spaghetti, and then the fajitas you can get some wraps, and then you can serve those with the wraps. Okay, so that's almost, you can see it's pretty much done for the rest of the camera. So it's predominantly brown. There are some little pink bits in. There's no particularly large lumps, but we're going to simmer it for up to half an hour, so those will do. Okay, so I've put in the mixed herbs. There's some bay leaves that I'm going to put in. These are optional. You can buy them dried already. I happen to have a tree in my garden, in fact several trees, which are little tiny trees, so I've just cut off some fresh bay leaves. And then I'm going to put some chopped tomatoes in. Chopped tomatoes, that's going to go in. So regardless of whether you're doing the spaghetti bolognese or the chili or the fajitas, then it's still a tin of tomatoes. So also that needs to go in here is the beef stock. So you can use a variety of beef stocks. I happen to have one of these, which are the stock pots. So if I can open it, I never can open these. Nope, that's not going to open for me. So I'm slightly lazy in that I don't like too much washing up, so I'm going to use the tin here. You need approximately 300 ml of beef stock. The can itself is about 400, so I know that I'm just going to need underneath the size of the can. It's not the greatest accuracy, but it's enough for what I'm going to be doing today. So I've just put the beef stock in there. It also means it's going to clear out all the tomato. So as an extra, then I often put in sun-dried tomato paste or just a tomato puree. This just gives it a richer texture. So I'm just going to put a tablespoon of the puree in. Also gives it a lovely colour. Sun-dried tomato paste is probably my favourite. I can't find it everywhere. I've only ever been able to find it in Sainsbury's. I think we're going to add another tablespoon. Oops. This is definitely preference, personal choice as to what you put in. We quite like it quite tomatoey. So while I'm waiting for the kettle to boil, just going to add the seasoning. So a little bit of pepper and a little bit of salt. Don't have to add the salt. I know some people don't like cooking with salt. Now it's important at this point to give it a taste, just to taste the tomatoes. Sometimes the tomatoes can be quite acidic, and so there's a really good way of making them less acidic by adding a small amount of sugar. So it doesn't have to be very much. A teaspoon is enough. And then that just takes the acidity of the tomatoes away. Yeah, that's lovely. Okay, so that's continuing to bubble while we wait for the stock. Kettle's almost done. I actually did a full kettle. Because I need it for my hot chocolate pudding recipe. Normally I just put enough water in that I need. And of course we're also going to need it for the spaghetti in a minute as well. Okay, so that's pretty much done. Just be careful when you're pouring it into here, because obviously this is metal, so therefore it is going to be hot very, very quickly. Oops. So I'm going to stir it as quickly as I possibly can, because you don't want to get too hot before, there we go. Okay, so that's now in here. Oops. Okay. So now what we're going to do is there's quite a lot of juice in there. We're going to leave that to simmer for a little bit. So as I've got quite a lot of juice, I'm not going to cover it. I'm going to leave it to simmer uncovered. Bring it to the boil first, because that will help to evaporate the water off. If it's quite dry, then put a lid on and then leave it for 15 minutes, check it, and then undo it. It's really important that you simmer at this point. If you have it bubbling a lot, then you'll end up burning the bottom of the pan, which I've managed to do several times. So there we go. So we're just going to leave that to bubble away. With some of the water, I'm going to put it into this smaller pan. I'm going to show you why. Because we're going to start the chocolate pudding recipe. Now the first thing is to make sure is that we have got a pan where the bowl sits over the top of it, but the bowl is not going to touch the water that I put inside. So here's the bowl. I'm just going to check it. Yep, that's perfect. And then I'm just going to put a little bit of water in there. Turn it on. So you want to put enough water in there that it will help to melt the chocolate, but not too much that it will touch the bottom of the bowl, but not too little that it'll end up running dry. So we're going to head over here to do the chocolate pudding recipe. Okay, so while that's bubbling nicely, in fact I'm going to turn it down a little bit more, then I have taken a bowl, and in the bowl I have put 100 grams of chocolate, which I've broken up. In fact, wash my hands first. Just going to stir that mince before I come back. Okay, so we've got in the bowl, I've got the chocolate, 100 grams of chocolate, which I've chunked up into small little pieces, and then I have got the 100 grams of butter. So I put those in together. Now what you can do is, if you're doing this for a pudding for friends, then you can add a little bit of liqueur or brandy, so something like Cointreau or amaretto, or anything that will give it a little bit of an extra kick, just for an evening meal. But I'm doing this for the family today, so I am just going to put the chocolates and the butter in. So I'm going to put it above the hot water, and I'm just going to leave that. Okay. And I'm just going to leave that to boil, to melt. So that's going to take about 5 or 6 minutes, possibly even longer, depending on how hot your water is. So while we're doing that, we're going to put some sugar into a bowl, and then we're going to put 55 grams of sugar into a bowl. Then we are going to add in some whole eggs, some yolks, and some vanilla extract. So here we have the eggs. I've put in the 2 whole eggs and 1 of the yolks, but I'm just going to show you how to do it now, because this is live. Then I'm hoping this isn't going to go everywhere. The secret to being able to break an egg is to have something with as sharp edge as possible. Unfortunately, these are quite chunky, but if you just crack it over the side, you get a hole, and then I'm just going to carefully break it in half, just taking the top off, which has the smallest side. and then gently I am just letting the white drop into the glass below. Now I'm going to try and scoop the egg yolk, so I'm just going to pass it to the other edge, and as I do that, the white is going to continue to go into the glass below. So I've now got the egg yolk left, the white is in there, and so that is going to go in there. So I've already done the others to save us a bit of time today. Just rinse my hands. And so the other egg yolk and the 2 eggs are going to go in there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to whisk this on a high speed until the mixture is doubled. So at the moment it's here, so I'm expecting it to get about 1/3 of the way up the bowl. Now this is going to be very noisy, and I will probably pause the video at some point so that if suddenly it is done, then you'll understand why on the video, because this is a very noisy machine. It's a very old noisy machine. Okay, so at this point I'm going to stop and I'm just going to check the Bolognaise, and I'm going to check the butter and the chocolate. So just coming over, I'm just going to stir that just slightly, just check everything's okay, and then I'm going to use a spoon just to stir the chocolate, making sure that it's melting. Yeah, still got a bit of time left on that. Okay, I'll leave that in there, and then I'm going to go back to mixing. So what I'm looking for, you can see that we've got quite a light white creamy consistency, but I'm looking for it to leave a trail when I pull the whisk out and leave a trail. It's almost done, so we're just going to give it a minute or so more. Okay, so you're beginning to see that when I take it out, it doesn't disappear straight away. It's starting to leave a trail. Okay, I'm just going to do that for a little bit more. The reason we do that is to try and add as much air to this mixture as possible, because then that makes the puddings all nice and fluffy. So you can see that it's right across the surface now, and it has clearly doubled in size, and so that is going to be enough for me to go on to the next stage. So that takes anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes to use the hand whisk. You can obviously do it by hand with a whisk, but that takes significantly longer, and you'll have a very strong arm at the end of it. So we're going to take these off. To move this over here. So we're going to go back to the chocolate just to check out the chocolate. So first of all, I'm just going to give the mince a bit of a stir, just check that's okay and it hasn't burnt to the bottom of the pan. And now we're going to check the chocolate. So all of the chocolate is melted, so I'm just checking to see if the butter's melted. Yeah, that looks perfect. So removing this from the heat, I'm going to take a tea towel. So just be careful because the glass could be hot. So I'm just going to take it off the heat and I'm going to stir it. So it will become a nice glossy colour as the butter and the chocolate melt into each other. Okay, beautiful glossy colour. So I've just realised that I have forgotten to add the vanilla extract with this mixture. It doesn't really matter because I'm just going to put it inside the chocolate mixture instead. So with the caster sugar, a trick that I use at home is that I actually keep my caster sugar in a jar with vanilla pods on. So this is the caster sugar. So I keep it in a separate jar, and you can see the vanilla pods poking out. That just gives I use this caster sugar for baking, so it just gives it a nice flavour. You can get vanilla pods from most supermarkets, and they just come in a jar with the herbs and spices. So I've put the vanilla extract in there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pour the chocolate around the edge of the bowl. This will help to cool it down so that it doesn't affect the mixture itself. Now I always use a spoon. You can pour it straight in around the edge, but I'm always worried that it's going to go absolutely everywhere. So you can see as I pour it down the edge of the bowl, it just disappears right to the bottom. So I'm just pouring the chocolate all the way around the outside of the bowl. Almost there. Probably got one more teaspoon, serving spoon. So that's all the chocolate in. At the same time, we're just going to take the flour. So I've got 30 grams of flour, plain flour, and I'm going to put that in a sieve. Really important that you do it in a sieve, because it needs to be really fine, because we're going to stir it in a minute. So it needs to be really fine. There's a lot of recipes you can get away with not having to sieve the flour, but unfortunately this isn't one of them. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a tablespoon. Any metal spoon will do, but the reason we use a metal spoon is because it's got a finer edge and it's about mixing this in. So we're going to do a scoop technique. So we're going to scoop it up and round. So this will take time, and it's probably the longest bit, in the sense that you want to do it as quickly as possible, but you're trying to keep as much air into the recipe as possible, and therefore you use a metal spoon and you use a folding technique. So for the purposes of the video, I'm probably going to do exactly the same, and shorten the video so that you will see it goes from this from this marbling effect to the chocolate. Otherwise it's going to be a very boring 10 minutes of the video. So I'm using a crossing technique to help get flour in. So cross it across the top and then mix it round. Okay, and I'm going to continue to do that until it's all mixed in a nice uniform colour. So we're about halfway through. It might be very tempting to put the whisk back in, but don't. Because of the mixing of the chocolate and the flour, then it becomes very dense and then you lose that air. It does take a long time, but it's worth it, I promise. So I'm continuing to use that round the edge of the bowl and cut, because particularly with the chocolate at the bottom, because the chocolate is heavier, then it's really important that we get right to the bottom to make sure we've got no chocolate, the darker one at the bottom. Okay, so we have pretty much done. You can see it's a nice uniform colour right the way to the bottom. So I haven't got the dark band at the bottom, and it's a nice uniform colour. I've not managed to get too much of the air, so it's still quite a lot of it. So what we're going to do with that now is we're going to put them into little basins. Now it doesn't matter what basins you use. I'm going to use these cooking ones. But you can use, if you've got ramekins, which are the small ceramic dishes, or if you've ever had goo, then you use, I kept my goo pots and then I've just reused my goo pots. So what I'm doing is making sure that I have buttered the inside of these containers. That's really important that you butter them, because otherwise they'll stick to the sides and then they won't come out in nice little mountains. So I'm just going to, I've done the others, so I'm just going to do these two. So to butter them, all I've used is part of the butter wrap, and then I've put some butter on it. It's nice and messy, but then I can just wipe it around the edges of the bowls. Okay. I'm just going to wash my hands, get rid of the butter. Meanwhile, I'm just going to check my Bolognaise. That's the problem with cooking on electric. It's not bubbling at all now, so I'm just going to turn it up a smidge and just continue to let it simmer nicely. So you can see already a lot of the water has gone, a lot of the stock has gone, so we're just going to leave it for a little bit longer. Okay, so back to the pots. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the chocolate, just check I've got it all, and then we're going to load up the chocolate pots. So I'm just going to take in fact, I'm going to use the bigger spoon. Oh. Let me go and wash that. So I'm just going to take the bigger spoon because it's just easier, and then we are just going to pour it, she says, into the pots. So these won't rise a great deal. Oh, that's the trouble with the chocolate, is that it goes everywhere, and I've made a mess. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit more in. So it depends on the size as to how much you want to put in. I do about 3/4 full. The important thing is not how much is in them, it's that they are all the same, because you're going to cook them. Now, as you cook them, what is really important is that I say important, it's personal preference when you cook them as to how long you put them in the oven for. So the recipe says 12 minutes, 14 minutes if they've come out of the fridge. But it depends on your oven as to how much you need them in there for. Okay, so I've done 2. I'll do a 3rd one. And then we'll put them in the oven. So again, depending on how well you did with the keeping the air in, will be dependent on how many pots you need. So the recipe is for 4. But as you can see, I've already got 4 pots, and I'm probably going to be able to do a 5th. However, I have had it the other way, when I've done a recipe for 6 and then ended up only with 4 pots. Depending on the size of your pots is another one. If you have smaller pots, then obviously you'll be able to have more. They're looking all about the same. Let's get rid of that spoon. We're just going to pour the last one in. If you've got a spatula, then the spatula will, you'll be able to get more of the chocolate out. I don't know if I've got one in here. It's the trouble when it's not your own kitchen, it's somebody else's. So this one looks as though it's going to be marginally smaller because I haven't got the spatula to. So this will not need to go in for so long. So at this point, you can either do one of two things. You can put them in the fridge because they're wonderful, made in advance. Cover them with cling film and then just get them out when you need. They'll need slightly longer to cook if that is the case. Alternatively, which is what we're going to do, we're just going to shove them straight in. So I've preheated the oven to 200 degrees centigrade. Yeah, 200 degrees centigrade, and that's going to go in for 12 minutes. Okay, so we're going to go back to our bolognese. Yeah, so it's had now about 20 minutes, so it just needs another 10 minutes more. So normally what I would do with the chocolate pots is I would leave the chocolate pots and I would cook the chocolate pots when I have served the bolognese, because it takes about 12 minutes by the time my lot have eaten, then it is time for the chocolate pots. Just for the process of the video, then I've put the chocolate pots in now so that it'll all be ready at the same time. So we're just going to put the spaghetti on. So we're going to put the hot water in here. So a trick I've learnt for, so I always put a bit of salt on because it helps to change it allows it to boil more. And the tip that I learnt from these groups is you can put some oil in, which then allows you to, then it means it doesn't stick. So I never know how much spaghetti to put in. For a family of, if I'm cooking for 6 people, then I use the whole of this. If there's just the 5 of us, then I'll have it for leftovers the next day. However, I learned recently that if you have one of these, then the idea of the whole is to be able to tell you what one portion is. So that's a little bit too much for one portion. And so the whole in that's still too much. The whole in this here is supposed to show you what one portion is. And so that's a single portion. I'm going to add a little bit more. So I'm going to put in 2 portions. So the important thing is to make sure that the water is boiling, because as you put it in, then you want it to soften as it goes round. At the moment you can see, so it's just sitting in the side of the pan, and then what will happen is as it softens, then you'll be able to turn it around the pan, but that just needs a little bit longer. So I'm just going to stir the mince. You can see the water, it's a lot less liquidy than it was before, which is nice. So we're just going to leave it for those last few minutes while the spaghetti does. Obviously my water wasn't quite hot enough. I must admit I generally cheat. I don't have whole spaghetti. I cut the spaghetti in half because I end up getting it all over the place when I am eating. So be careful that you don't burn yourself at this point. Just rotate around the pan. Oh, I made a mess of that. There we go. Oh, clearly it wasn't hot enough. Okay, so as that as that continues to heat up and it will go around the pan, I am going to pause the video and then I'm going to clear up so that when I next see you, then we'll be able to take the chocolate puddings out and hopefully everything will be done. Okay, so we're just going to check the chocolate puddings. It's just been the 12 minutes. I'm just going to take them out to check them. Ooh, actually, it looks as though the oven, so this is what I was said about the oven depending on how quickly they cook. So it looks as though they've cooked quite a lot. So you can see they're nicely domed. So that is hot, so I'm going to put that just there. And I'm just going to take one of them. Okay, and so I'm going to take it now, fingers crossed that when I pop it onto the plate that it comes out. So it hopefully, yes, there we go. Okay, so you can see how it's stuck slightly. So that's why the butter's really important. And then we're just going to cut it open. Yes, so the oven has cooked it quite quickly, and so therefore it hasn't got the melted middle. So what we're going to do is we're going to try one of the, I think the others are the same. Let's check this one. Oh yes, that one looks as though it might do. So I'm going to get another plate. I'll try the slightly smaller one, which I put in. No, that's not having it. So if it does stick for whatever reason, then just take a knife and you should be able to go round quite gently, and then hopefully it will pop out. Oh, she says, oh gosh, very hand-fisted today. It's a lot easier with a no, it's still not happy about that. It's got stuck at the bottom. It's the trouble about doing a video, which is why I decided to record it. There we go, we got there in the end. Okay, so you can see that this time when I cut into it, then it's got a melting middle. So it all depends on how you like it. I actually prefer it cooked all the way through. However, you can see this one, I cooked it for a little less amount of time, and so therefore it's got a melting middle. So you can either serve it with cream. I prefer ice cream, so I'm going to add a little bit of ice cream. So you either, if you've got a vanilla, if you've got a scoop, brilliant. If not, then just a spoon. There we go. So you have your melt in the middle chocolate pudding. There we go. As I say, I prefer it like this because it's got, I prefer it cooked all the way through, more like a sponge. You can add whipping cream, double cream, single cream. You can add a chocolate sauce over the top if you wanted to do melt a little bit more extra chocolate. You can do that over the top as well. What's really important is, as I say, a bit of a trial and error with the cooking of the chocolate puddings, depending on your oven, and once you know your oven more than anybody else. So I'll go back to the spaghetti now. Normally I'd have done that the other way around. So the spaghetti's nicely cooking here. Let's move these out of the way. There we go. So the Bolognaise has had just over half an hour now with the spaghetti. So we're going to drain the spaghetti using a colander. the oven. So warming the plates through, I can put them in the oven because the chocolate puddings are in the oven, and that will just warm them through, but just be careful when you take them out because they'll be too hot. And then we're going to put some spaghetti on here. So I usually put the spaghetti on top. The spaghetti bolognese on top. My son prefers it to the side, so it's all personal preference. So I'm just going to put, there we go, on there. I'm going to come back over here. So you can put a little bit of decoration on the top, put some fresh basil leaves. You can actually put the fresh basil inside. We're just going to sprinkle that over the top. And then we usually have cheese. Red Leicester is lovely because it gives that different colour, the orange, or we tend to have cheddar, or you can have Parmesan, which is a popular one for spaghetti bolognese. And so there we have it. We have a spaghetti bolognese with a melt in the middle chocolate pudding. Thank you for watching. So next week we have the lovely Anita and Chris, who will be doing a gorgeous Thai chicken. So I look forward to tasting that next week. Thanks very much for watching.